So let's talk about one of the biggest paradoxes of success. How do you actually get bigger without, well, getting worse? How do you scale your impact without losing the very soul of what made your work matter to begin with? Let's dive in.
This is the question that keeps so many successful founders and leaders up at night. It's that quiet fear you get when you realize you have more influence than you ever expected. This is the central tension we're going to unpack today. All right, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the dilemma itself. Then look at how purpose gets lost in the noise. After that, we'll see how scale is really just an amplifier. Then we'll get practical with a framework for your guardrails. And finally, we'll talk about what a lasting legacy really looks like.
Okay, so let's start with the core problem. We're all taught that growth is the ultimate goal, right? But the truth is, it's a total double-edged sword. On one hand, yeah, growth is amazing. It gives you more reach, more influence, and more responsibility to make a real difference. But on the other hand, there's this constant risk that you'll dilute your purpose, that you'll lose the original meaning, and you'll end up prioritizing scale over soul. And that's the conflict we have to navigate.
Now, here's the fascinating and kind of scary part. Purpose is almost never lost on purpose. It's not like there's some evil plan. It just fades away through 1,000 tiny, unintended consequences of moving faster and getting bigger.
See, as you scale, you start making these subtle trade-offs without even realizing it. Speed starts to feel way more important than taking a moment to reflect. You start chasing metrics because they're easy to measure, not the meaning that's harder to quantify. You prioritize just getting bigger over making sure everyone's still pulling in the same direction. And before you know it, you're all about short-term wins instead of long-term impact. And there's actually a powerful psychological bias behind all this. It's called intergenerational discounting. It's just a fancy way of saying we are literally hardwired to care more about what we get right now than about the long-term consequences for other people. This one idea explains so much about why a long-term purpose is just so fragile. So here's the bottom line for this section. The systems we build for growth are set up to reward what's easy to count, things like revenue, users, output. But purpose, trust, integrity, that stuff is way harder to put on a spreadsheet. And in the chaos of scaling, it's dangerously easy to ignore.
This brings us to what I think is the single most important insight in this whole explainer. We tend to think that scale creates brand new problems, but that's not quite it. Growth is really just an amplifier. It doesn't replace your foundation, it just shines a giant spotlight on it for everyone to see.
Just let that sink in for a second. Scaling doesn't actually change who you are or what your organization is about. It just takes the values you already have, good or bad, and turns up the volume on them, like way up. And you can see how this plays out, right? If your foundation, your character is a little shaky, well, scale is just going to multiply that confusion and spread any damage. But if that foundation is solid, if you've got deep roots, then scaling radiates clarity, it compounds trust, and it ensures your integrity doesn't just survive, it actually thrives.
Okay, so if scale just amplifies what's already there, then the big question is, how do you make sure your foundation is rock solid? This is where we shift from just talking about the problem to doing something about it. We've got to build some guardrails.
The very first, and honestly the most important step, is to just pause and ask this question before you start to scale. Before you get obsessed with the numbers, you have to define your non-negotiables. What are you willing to grow slower for? What result matters more to you than just getting bigger? This leads to 3 very concrete actions. 1, define your core values, and I mean really articulate them so there's no confusion. 2, scale your principles, not your personality. Your purpose can't rely on one charismatic leader. It has to be baked into your systems. And 3, measure what actually matters, even if it's hard. If quality is a core value, figure out how to track it. If it's alignment, measure that.
And it's so important to get this straight. These guardrails are not brakes. They aren't there to stop you. Think of them more like a compass. They're there to shape your growth, to make sure you're not just moving fast, but you're moving in the right direction.
So all of this brings us to our final section, where we can kind of zoom out and rethink what successful growth even looks like. Because it's not about short-term wins. It's about building a legacy that's going to last. And this isn't just some feel-good philosophy. The data actually backs this up. Research shows that organizations led by what you might call legacy-minded leaders, people who are obsessed with long-term impact, they actually outperform their peers by roughly 30%.
Thinking long-term isn't just nice, it's a massive competitive advantage. This really forces us to challenge that whole growth at all costs idea. Sometimes the smartest strategic move you can possibly make is to actually slow down. A more deliberate pace preserves trust, it protects your quality, it strengthens your foundation, and ultimately it deepens your impact in a way that just growing recklessly never ever can. And that really brings us to the core takeaway, the one big idea I hope you walk away with. Scaling impact isn't really about becoming bigger. It's about becoming truer, a more authentic, more potent version of your core purpose, just at a larger scale.
So if you remember just one thing from all of this, let it be this. Growth is a choice, it's a strategy, but meaning is the whole reason you started in the first place. Meaning is not optional.
Which leaves us all with one final question to think about. As you move forward, what are you really scaling? Your numbers or your values? And in the long run, how is that choice going to define the legacy you leave behind?